Mr. Grant, members of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs, and guests. In scanning some details about the life of our speaker, one immediately sees wide international perspective. Birth in China in 1922, a college degree from Berkeley, California, a law degree from Harvard in 1951. Among the many important posts Mr. Grant has held is as President and CEO of the Overseas Development Council, where he was the first to hold such a post. The founding director, in other words, President. Before that, he was Assistant Administrator of AID, and prior to that, Director of the AID program in Turkey with the rank of Minister. Other assignments include Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asian Affairs. He guided World Development Planning for AID's predecessor, the International Cooperation Administration. He served 2 years in Sri Lanka, 2 years in India, and a total of more than 3 years in China. This gentleman has served as a director of various organizations involved with development. For example, the World Council of Churches and the Foreign Policy Association. He was vice chairman of the World Food and Nutrition Study for the President of the United States. He served on the Committee on International Health with the U.S. Institute of Medicine. His 3 years as president of the Society for International Development were capped when he presided at the outstanding convention attended by delegates from all over the world here in Baltimore last summer. He is a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation and Johns Hopkins University. We are fortunate to have with us the dynamic, dedicated expert who personifies the concept that the nations of the world are one international community. It is a privilege to present Dr. James P. Grant.
Thank you, Herbert Connor. It's very nice to be here as one who was not born or raised in Baltimore. I feel like I have many, many roots in this great city, this great state. My father was in the first MPH match in the public health class at Johns Hopkins in 19... Who can? Carl Taylor? When was it? 1918? 19 what?
23, 21,
20, no, 20 I think it was.
20.
Yes. And it's been a great pleasure to be in and out of here. I've been a trustee of that great institution, Johns Hopkins, which really makes its mark felt all over the world, including the fact that the reason I was born in China was that I had a father who, after he got his MPH from here, was one of a group that went to China at the instructions of the Rockefeller Foundation to set up in China a, quote, Johns Hopkins for China, quote. And the Rockefeller Foundation made available the largest single grant they have ever made, $44 million in 1918 for this purpose. And the institution in its own way remains, in many ways, a preeminent medical institution. There, played a prominent role in the evolution of the barefoot doctors in their first formative stages. So anyway, I feel very much at home here, plus the fact, as I will get into later, as far as UNICEF is concerned, there is no state in the Union in which the congressional delegation of congressmen and senators has been more for UNICEF, more outspoken than for Maryland. So this is a thing I'm very proud of. Well, that's not what I'm here to talk about yet at this moment. Most of you know UNICEF. I'm mentioning this noon when I was in Washington. When I first called on the new Secretary General, Perez de Cuellar, a year ago, January, he had worked for the United Nations on stage, and he said to me, after a moment of pleasantry, he said, "Jim, of course I know UNICEF. Everybody knows UNICEF. But he says, what does UNICEF do?" And you know, this is, I think, a rather widespread feeling. And it's, if I may spend just one moment on this before I get to the main purpose, main theme of my talk. UNICEF had its origins in 1946 to deal with the aftermath, children caught in the aftermath of World War II. These are what we call the loud emergencies, children that have been affected by wars, earthquakes, disasters. And 2 or 3/4 of our money was initially spent in Europe, Poland, Germany, Austria. One of the people we fed in those days was Kurt Waldheim, the former Secretary General's daughter, at a very young age. Italy, France, Germany, Netherlands, Japan, China. But when that phase ended in the late 40s, we moved into what became, and is today, our principal task, and that is to deal with what we frequently call the silent emergency. And these are the children who come from families that are caught in great poverty combined with gross underdevelopment. Their mothers have no education. They're nowhere close to any simple health facility. There's no clean water to drink. Basically a very underdeveloped situation. And these conjunctions of forces lead to some 40,000, more than 40,000 more children dying every day. We call it the silent emergency because this total, which adds up to the equivalent of a Hiroshima every 3 days, if you had a Hiroshima occurring every 3 days, incinerating 120,000 small children, the world would be up in arms. 2 weeks ago, there was the unfortunate earthquake in Papaya, Cauca, Colombia, or really the San Francisco, if I may call it. Colombia went down in trembling. 200 people died. Made every headline, but the 40,000 small children that died that day didn't. So that's what we call the silent emergency. And to deal with this silent emergency requires a developmental rather than a relief response. How do you educate the mothers? How do you help the villages and the slums get clean water? How do you get health auxiliaries and essential health facilities developed? How do you get primary schools open? And this is the main business of UNICEF today. The other characteristics of UNICEF, very simply put, are that it is a relatively small organization. Our budget is about $350 million a year, adds up to the price of 7 F-15 aeroplanes a year. That's the budget of the world community's chosen international agency for children. We have about 2,000 people. These people are some 75 to 80% in our field offices. UNICEF is the most decentralized of any of the international or bilateral aid agencies. They're not only overwhelmingly located in the poorest countries, but they are scattered in dozens of sub-offices within India, within Bangladesh, within Pakistan. It happens also to be the most women-oriented organization, maybe properly so, since UNICEF is concerned with children and mothers. The 28% of our staff are women. 5 of our top 12 people are women. Finally, it is noteworthy for being the most grassroots of any of the international governmental agencies. In fact, the only really grassroots agency of the international system. We have active national committees in many countries, a very active Baltimore committee, with many of our familiar faces here, O'Connors who belong, others who play a very active role in this, not only in raising money, but in creating a public opinion climate that makes it much easier for the government to support this. Now, the theme that I want to address today is this question of the extremely dark times that the impact of these on children. One can, this noon, Clarence Long, Congressman Long, spoke in Washington, and he said, when you get into emergency situations, all too often, children last. And he's quite correct that in the disastrous situations we face, the impact, of course, is hardest on the poorest families. They lose their job in developing countries. There's no social security. There's no unemployment insurance. They take a terrible beating, and then within the family, it tends to be the children and mothers that take it very much on the chin. Regrettably, governmental programs also get cut back in these dark times, and when they cut back in these dark times, they tend to cut back even more on programs that deal with children than they do on programs that deal with adults. Children don't vote. This is true whether you look at the United States or most developing countries. So it's in this framework that we really see a situation today where it appears likely, unless there is a change of course, that the 1980s will see several million more small children and their mothers die than we thought likely 3 years ago. A really terrible total of the current disease that we have. Well, this has, of course, forced agencies, UNICEF, to kind of go back to the drawing boards. How do we cope with this? How do we live with this? Now, our first challenge has been, how do we survive as an agency? First instincts of many governments is to cut back on their own support for UNICEF. And we've seen it here in the United States, where for the last 3 years, the administration has requested 30 to 40% reductions in the money provided by the United States UNICEF. Each time, it's been rebuffed by the Congress, led, I must say, by the Maryland delegation, and they have not only prevented the cuts, but provided an increase. The interesting thing is, this same sort of pattern has been followed in country after country. And even though there have been many instincts by governments to cut back, when the dust settles, only once has there really been a reduction from a major governmental source involving a country that was the UK on Maggie Thatcher's first year. And she apologized to me when I saw her in December for one of the mistakes that she had made in her first year of office. But it's the public opinion that makes a big difference to whether people think these things are a mistake or not. But far more important here really has been, in these difficult times, how do we get more effective programs to reach children? And this has led, in the last 2 years, to the most searching internal inquiry by many organizations as to what can you do in these dark times. And it often happens when situations get very difficult. One gets new perceptions, new values. And at a session that we held last September, this process was culminated. Carl Taylor participated in it from Johns Hopkins. And out of this came a set of conclusions which were embodied in UNICEF's State of the World Children report from 1982-1983, which was released on December 17th. In the 2 weeks following it, it generated more, it was front page of the New York Times and Le Monde and around the world. It generated more public statements of support than any other statement of this sort issued in the United Nations in the memory of the people around there. The Secretary General commended this as a major statement. People as different as Indira Gandhi and Margaret Thatcher spoke out. Olaf Palmer Sweden spoke out on this. And what it said was that there is a potential for a health revolution in children in the next 8, 10, 12 years. That is as great in most developing countries as was the potential for a green revolution in the late 1960s in many countries of Asia. That we see the potential within this time period for so improving the health of children at low cost that we could anticipate a reduction by half of the 40,000 small children who die every day at the present time, and a reduction by half of the disabilities, the blindness, the crippling, the deafness, the blindness that afflicts children today. Now, this raises the question, what kind of a potential is this? What makes it so low cost? What's happened here? Basically, it's a coming together of two very different sets of technological advances. One is there are a series of technological breakthroughs that have taken place in the last decade that have not been fully utilized and are now available. The second is that there is a whole new capacity to communicate with poor families that did not exist to anything like the same degree 10 or 12 years ago. The advent of the transistor radio, you go to any home in northeast Brazil, every other home in India, electronic media has penetrated. You go to virtually any village in South Asia today, and there are some young mothers that can read and write. There are several million more health auxiliaries and community workers today than there were 10 years ago in the developing countries. So there is a potential to reach people that didn't exist before, if these are all mobilized. Now, there were 4 techniques in particular that were identified by this group last September. The first of these dealt with the single biggest killer of small children. So some 5 million small children die every year from that simple thing called diarrhea. Under its most acute form, it's called cholera. But when a small child, particularly if it's already down the road of malnutrition, loses 10 or 15% of its body weight in water, he goes into shock and dies. And some 14 or 15,000 small children every day die from this rather simple cause. Until very recently, the only widely known cure was to replace the lost water and body salt intravenously. You can just again. This, of course, required a relatively high technology. You had to have some kind of a skilled person to do it. It was expensive, you needed a facility, and since 90% of the children who were dying from diarrhea were not anywhere close to having access to a health facility, the two really did merge. And there was a demonstrated discovery in the 70s that if you took the water and the salt that you wanted to get back into the child and added to it just the right amount of glucose, sugar, that with that just the right amount, the child could absorb 25 times as much of the fluid and the salt as if he or she drank the fluid and the salt by himself. That you could, in effect, rehydrate a child orally virtually the same as you could from this high technology feeding. And so today you can buy, UNICEF buys these packets at 6 cents, which will cope with a bout of acute diarrhea. And if you are desperate, it can be a home remedy can be made. It's 80% is good, made up of the right mixture of sugar, salt, and water mixed together. And there's a home remedy that works. Now, the big challenge, of course, is how do you get the 98% of the mothers who are not aware that there is a cure how do you make them available, knowledgeable, aware that there is a cure? And secondly, once they're aware there is a cure, how do you have it available so that you can go out and buy it from the same place that you buy matches or batteries in your village kiosk, or you know enough to make it yourself? Here's where the communications revolution comes in. And this is where, for example, in a country such as Peru, in one intensive year-long program, led by the president, mobilizing the Catholic priests, using every neighbor, business, all the channels, hundreds of radio spots, they were able to cut the death rate from diarrhea, the single biggest killer of children in that country, in half in just 1 year. And this is illustrative of the combination of a technology and using the new capacity to communicate that now exists. The second of these major programs deals with immunization. Another 5 million or so children a year die from 6 diseases against which we have ready immunizations today. The cost of the vaccines is only about 50 cents. Again, we have 2 sets of problems. One is, how do you get the vaccine out to where they're needed? Most vaccines need to be refrigerated. It's a cold chain problem, and it's only as we either build a cold chain or we make the vaccines less dependent upon refrigeration that you get them out. Well, real progress is being made on both of these fronts. We now have a measles vaccine that is good for several weeks outside of refrigeration. The other problem, of course, is how do you convince the mothers to bring their children in to be immunized? They normally have to come in for 3 shots, for 3 bouts, and if the mother brings in the child the first time and the typhoid or one of the other shots causes the baby to have a temperature and a fever that night and cries all night, how do you persuade the illiterate mother to come back again? You get the second and the third shot. These mothers are doing this. Again, what we're finding is that when you mobilize the new capacities to communicate, together with the expanded primary health care system that's evolving, one can get some really spectacular breakthroughs on the immunization front. Currently, in developing countries, only about 20% of the children are being immunized. And there's a great potential for movement here, if government will treat it as important. The third area of significant potential, low-cost potential, is the greater promotion of breastfeeding. Today, when you go to places like Port-au-Prince, Recife in Brazil, a very sizable proportion of the children that die, they die as a consequence of their mothers having taken them off breastfeeding and moving to bottle feeding, which deprived them both of the immunizations that they used to get from their mother to the breastfeeding, and then introduced a very unsanitary facility in most cases, many cases. In the slum areas such as Port-au-Prince, all it takes is a 2-hour walk through to make one absolutely shudder as you see the milk bottle, unclean, sitting in a 89 or 95 degree festering temperature. And it takes very little imagination to see what's going on inside that bottle and impacting the child. It's huge. And the turnaround in breastfeeding we have in the United States is something we are working hard at today to turn around. Our estimate is that in the next decade, with the effective promotion of breastfeeding around the world, promoted comprehensively effectively, it could make the difference of another 1 million deaths a year. Again, this is a low-cost technique. The fourth of the low-cost techniques is to improve the mother's capacity to monitor the growth of her children. We've become aware through our research that most mothers do not recognize mild or moderate malnutrition in babies or in small children when it occurs. Usually when they are aware of it, the child is too far down the road. And they have found that through some devices, such as simple growth charts that are used in Indonesia, that by weighing the babies monthly, plotted on a growth chart, you give the mother a management tool. She takes it home herself. And as long as the baby's weight is going up, the baby is reasonably good shape. If the baby's weight begins to go straight line, it means that it's heading for trouble. If the baby's weight drops, as it often does, diarrhea, infections, the like, then clearly it's in heavy trouble. Now, what they have found with these in Indonesia, and Dr. Palpate is back from there, is that through use of techniques like this, the mother has a very significant capacity herself, once she's to course correct, either by fighting for more food from the family table for the baby, or to change the weaning food mix. And it also identifies the kind of, if you have supplementary food programs, a tool for that. At the same time, they use it to teach the mothers how to make more rehydration salts themselves, use it for promotion of breastfeeding, for weaning foods. When they're called again, they can be immunized. And these are techniques by which, these four techniques are all techniques which are not only low cost, but they greatly increase the self-reliance of the mother, of the family to deal with these problems themselves. You know, the old adage, give somebody a fish, you feed them for a day, teach them how to fish, and you feed them for a lifetime. Well, in effect, these are programs which, when you teach a mother how to cope with diarrhea at home, she is far more self-reliant than if she has to take the only way she can deal with that child is take some non-available or distant hospital at great cost, at great disruption to looking after the rest of her family. How does she spend her time between the family? Clearly, a mother that effectively breastfeeds the child is way ahead of a mother that is dependent, of low-income mothers dependent on bottle feeding and the like. And the same can be said of once the child is certainly a growth chart. It gives the mother far more capacity to manage her own children's situation. And even immunization is something that is like an insurance scheme. Once your child is immunized, you have to be taking out insurance to allow you to deal with this. So these are a very powerful set of programs. The real question is, how do you get governments to do them? Most governmental leaders, if you talk to the president of most countries, most governments, they're not aware that there are these programs that could make this difference for their children. So the first challenge is, how does one throughout the world create awareness that there is this potential for a health revolution? The second challenge is, as people become more aware, how do we make it so that it becomes good politics for them to pursue these programs? And if a government 4 or 5 years from now doesn't do these, despite the obvious potential for forward movement in them, then how does it become bad politics for them not to move? Now, the public reaction to this, as I indicated, has been really quite remarkable so far. The question, of course, that we almost invariably get, and if I didn't ask it, I could predict that within the first 5 minutes one of you would ask it, is, and it's usually asked rather hesitantly, rather embarrassedly, of course we're for saving lives. Who can let them see them die? But aren't you really just helping them to survive into miserableness? Aren't you really, if you really are successful in saving 20,000 lives a day, 10 years from now, 12 years from now, aren't you greatly aggravating the population explosion? And it's very interesting, after I was talking to Muhammad Ali about all this the other day. He was looking for a cause to take on. He was there with his promoter. And he didn't ask many questions. The promoter did all the talking. When I saw through the first question he asked was this. Interesting enough, after I was talking to Senator Percy, who was taking the lead in the Senate side, introducing a joint resolution on this, his first comment after this, well, I think this is a great program, Jim. We're sure going to have to put aside more money for family planning. Now, actually, I think we can make the answer quite categorically that to both of these questions. Aren't you really going to just allow children to survive in a miserable mess. And I cannot make a population explosion worse. The answer to both is no. On the first one, I think the way to look at it is to recognize that it's not a question of just snatching people to the edge of death. That this set of programs, which is working obviously in a broader primary health care context, would literally be making tens, scores of millions of children healthier. And really, the fewer deaths and fewer disabilities are the tip of the iceberg of a much better improved health situation. So you're really talking about a large body of children with improved health. My God, how many tens of millions of parents are really happier because they don't have these sick children on their hands. On the second, it's harder to be to be fully definitive on it, but it's pretty well agreed now that these sets of measures, which require that the mother herself play an active part, will result in the mother's attitude changing to a family size very quickly. Just as we found that if you educate, if you take 1,000 women from a community, give them primary education, 1,000 women you leave alone, same thing. 1,000 women who've gotten the primary education will not only have a much lower death rate of their children, but a much lower birth rate. And if you really think about it, it is understandable. This is not avoiding deaths by doing away with famines or doing away with epidemics, which are external changes on the death rate. These are all things, unless that mother brings the child in to be immunized, unless that mother knows how to get they're aware of how to prepare the home remedies, they won't work. She's got to participate. And this is part of the great difference of this. This is essentially a women's problem, I should say, that we're very heavily involved in. Now, let me close on the note of what does it mean for all of us here, you in Baltimore, Maryland. First, there is an exciting major concept on the scene. I don't know whether you want to put it in a category as the concept of civil rights, or environment, or women's rights, but there is a major new concept here that half the children that are dying, put it around, that hundreds of millions of children that are in bad health need not be in that bad health for nearly as long and for a sustained period around. And that what we need, that this is a major idea that people should be aware of, and we should build into our ethos. A big change in the last 50 years is that a series of things that were acceptable 50 years ago are no longer acceptable to at least large numbers of people, whether it's civil rights or colonialism or attitudes toward women, or I should say, loud emergencies. 50 years ago, if you had a major earthquake or major casualties as a result of war, people said it was a terrible thing. But nobody really did anything about the people who died in Ireland in the Great Famine, or who were in Bengal and died by the millions on the street, or the million died in the streets of Calcutta. But today there is a new ethos, where the world responds. You get a Kampuchea, you get a Lebanon. And somehow, if a government doesn't respond, when the Carter administration moved very slowly in response to Kampuchea in '79, they were going to pay $4 or $5 million. In 1 week, President Carter, under intense pressure, had gone, if I remember correctly, to $60 million. And 1 week later, it was to $100 million. Well, it was just bad politics not to move and good politics to move. And so that one of our challenges here is how do we create a new ethos out of this situation, and all of you play an influential position in that. Secondly, it's very clear that there is a major potential for people in Congress to make a difference here. Now, as I said, you have a delegation here from Maryland, both the Senate side and the House side, that really is unique. And I do hope that you will identify those people out see that they get support. Clarence Long has been an outstanding supporter of us in the House Appropriations Committee in this process of how to turn around the administration's requests each year. Third, of course, there are things that you yourselves can do to make, in your own fields, to make a contribution. It will vary. I see a group of people, Johns Hopkins students, graduate students, and clearly there's a role for you. There's a very real role to practice these in the United States. Hospitals in the United States, I don't know about Baltimore, have been terribly slow in moving to the promotion of the use of oral rehydrated inside the hospital, and even slower to educate low-income mothers so they can do this at home. And this morning I was talking with a woman who was talking about how her child got caught in a situation after 4 days because of acute diarrhea. The bill was $2,300, I think, in the hospital. I mean, it's a serious problem here that we can deal with. Finally, of course, we at UNICEF are very appreciative. If you have no other way of making yourself felt, you get our greeting cards and send them out not only at Christmas time and the holidays, but other holidays, Easter. This is not only, we find that the greeting cards are, and other events like this, the Halloween youngsters going out for youth. These are all very powerful tools of education, of creating an attitude, a state of mind that has resulted today in a unique degree of support and approval of UNICEF as the agency for children that all of us seem to have a feeling that we believe in. So on that note, Bert, thank you very much.
For that most informative, interesting review of the 4 techniques, your statement as to what citizens can do in helping government do more, and we are happy to have you agree to take a few questions.
Take the man from the right first, then from the left.
Dr. Grant, thank you very much for coming to Baltimore and the opportunity for us to hear you. UNICEF did in terms of developing an international code for marketing of infant formula, as identified as part of that issue. Where is the code now? How has it gone in terms of the countries adopting it and implementing it? The second part is in terms of the multinational corporations themselves, and specifically Nestle. As you know, there's been an international boycott, and now Nestle has said they intend to comply with and implement the code. Where is Nestle?
Well, as many of you know, in the 1979, UNICEF and the World Health Organization put together a draft code of standards for the marketing of infant formula, breast milk substitutes, they call it, and for the promotion of breastfeeding, which was presented to the World Health Assembly and as something to be voted as an international voluntary standard for which countries were then encouraged to vote their own regulatory provisions, using these as a minimum. It was voted on in May of 1981. The vote was 118 to 1, with 3 abstentions. One negative vote, I regret to say, was the United States. Since then, there has been a major flurry of activity, and if my memory serves me correctly, well, they had to report back to the World Health Assembly this May as to what they've done. There are some 50 countries that are well down the road or have enacted the code. Some of the codes are more strict. Most of them are either at the same or less strict. Many of the principal opposition to these codes has tended to come from companies inside the country rather than from the international. Internal sources have been concerned that this would affect their marketing practices on this. As far as Nestle's is concerned, I myself am satisfied that the intentions of the top management of Nestle today have shifted dramatically, and that they are sincere in their protestations that they are in support of the code. They have issued instructions to all their field distributors, instructions which we have gone over with them, and their instructions to their country representatives now, except for Europe, are that they should abide by the code even though the country may not have a code, and that if the country then enacts a code that is less strict than the code, they should still adhere to the standards set forth in the code, even if it means that they lose market share as a result. And as always in a worldwide enterprise, there are some deviations from this, but I myself am satisfied from hours of discussion with the Chief Executive Officer that at least he is genuine, and I consider this a great step forward. At the moment, of the international companies, the most resistant remain in the United States. I really don't understand why. But there's been substantial progress in this. As you know, inside the United States, there has been a tremendous shift back toward breastfeeding, particularly among people with education. Right. Yes?
Follow up on that question I asked. What do you think we should do in terms of the American companies? What's a good and practical way to encourage them to follow those?
Well, there are all sorts of private groups in the United States that are devoted to this, church groups and other non-profit organizations, and I think the easiest way for you to do interested is to associate yourself with that. UNICEF itself does not get involved in this kind of direct advocacy, but as in the case of Nestle's, when they sought to work out a series of programs that we would say, we in WHO thought were appropriate standards, we went along with this. It's like dealing with cigarettes or a whole series of fronts where we really are out to sort of change the standards, the values that we have in the way we do things. And it then becomes very important that the marketing channels, the profit channels, don't run too counter to what's good. And how do we mobilize them to be in support of the right practices rather than to be against it? I think the case of Nestle's, they very clearly, for example, see a far greater potential in the long run out of promoting at this stage, out of promoting good feeding practices for which they're weaning foods and others have a very significant place in it and to follow the path. And I haven't said this publicly anywhere else, but I think that what the non-governmental organizations that are maintaining the Nestle's boycott ought to do about now, frankly, is to consider whether they should disengage from that boycott, because it may be carrying on with punitive actions beyond the point of effective return, and when the target should be put on some other people who escape the heat because the pressure remains on Nestle's. Yes.
Is there any nation in the world that is boycotted by the WHO or UNICEF or participating in UNICEF and the WHO?
Well, the question was, is there any nation in the world that is boycotted from participating in WHO or UNICEF? The answer for UNICEF is of course not. It's an elected board, and so the issue doesn't arise the same way. For the World Health Assembly, the question of I can't really answer the question of South Africa. On the question of Israel, there's been debate on this one, but it's always been resolved in the favor of retention of Israel in the World Health Assembly. So, you know,
perhaps people might be interested in learning how UNICEF works. That is, that how the country who requests aid has to participate in some way in the UNICEF fund.
Well, the question was, how does UNICEF work in the field, and how do they participate in it? I should say that since UNICEF funds are limited, and since we are particularly interested in helping countries develop more innovative approaches and low cost of dealing with the problem, we sit down with governments and jointly think through what are the problem areas for children. And then when these are identified, how best can the UNICEF sources we use contribute to meeting? So it's really quite more so than most of the United Nations. So most aid agencies, it's a joint process. Now, when it's true, you will find almost invariably that the governmental contribution to the funding is much larger than the UNICEF contribution. But I should also add that usually the community's participation in projects, in terms of contributed self-help and other contributions in kind, will equal or exceed that being made available by the government. So the leverage is high one. A little bit goes a long way. Yes.
I have two questions, if I may. The first, you've given some very exciting news about improving the chances for survival of very young children. But I have a question regarding the quality of that life, and that is, what kind of work are you seeing in the area of river blindness, schistosomiasis, parasites? Because I understand that affects 60% of the world's population. And the second question is, it goes back to my childhood when I was a UNICEF trick-or-treater, and I used to call every year.
Here.
Pardon?
Here.
And I used to call every year on a woman who was a member of the John Birch Society, and it was during the Vietnam War, and she would always bring out these articles and say, UNICEF gives the communists over in Vietnam, and I'm not going to contribute. We were a bad boy for doing that. And so I used to argue with her, that these children were very big communists. Maybe if they were fed, they wouldn't be. But I'd like to hear your answer for her.
Well, let me just say on the river blindness, schistosomiasis, intestinal parasites, these are all areas where people are working away hard at, both on the research end, hoping to find easier solutions for them. The river blindness blocks off large amounts of acreage in Africa being effectively used. Terrible affliction of the people that are there. The current cures for trying to deal with it, the World Bank has a massive program, are fantastically expensive. They're going to vast sums. When the program's all over, it's quite possible that you revert back to the original situation. So there really is, in some areas, such as in my judgment, a major need for a major research breakthrough before you can push forward. Unlike oral rehydration salts, we don't have that low-cost breakthrough. On intestinal parasites, schistosomiasis, there's been some major advances on schistosomiasis in the last 2 or 3 years. Again, that's a difficult one. Schistosomiasis doesn't happen to be quite the killer that diarrhea is. It drags people down, as you know. And intestinal parasites tends to be the same. There's major new drugs that work very effectively on intestinal parasites. But again, the big problem we find in intestinal parasites is that you purge a child of it very quickly, but if they go out in their bare feet, and since they come with unless you've got pit latrines and other things, they promptly get reinfected again at a very high rate. Children don't tend to die from this. Again, it's not quite the same problem as the others. On the question of what response to helping communist children, UNICEF has been distinguished from the beginning that it treated children in distress regardless of political affiliation of their parents. And this has origins in China, where UNICEF worked both in communist China, 48, 49, 50, as well as in nationalist China. And from this came the precedent that no other UN agency legally has, which is that UNICEF can work at the request of local authorities whether or not they are recognized at the General Assembly in New York. So we were, in effect, able to work in communist China during the Civil War, even though the National Assembly in New York. This enabled us to work in Biafra and Lagos at the same time. It meant that we worked in North Vietnam and South Vietnam. During the Kampuchean, height of the Kampuchean crisis, UNICEF was working simultaneously in the Phnom Penh areas, in the Pol Pot areas, and in the Third Force areas along the border of the headline. And I think that's correct. The children are the future of the world, and that they shouldn't be held responsible for whatever the affiliations of their parents are. And I think it's been remarkable that UNICEF has been able to maintain this. It's been a very apolitical quality to UNICEF. It's been unique among the international organizations. And I hope we can continue it. Yes.
What age do you define child? I mean, where do you cut off child? 18, 16? Is he riding in the street or what? I don't know.
Well, you see, it's just that kind of question. If you pursue it too far, that gets us into political difficulties. Because we're also very concerned with mothers. And obviously age limitation, because you really can't deal with children separate from their association with their mothers for many of these problems. What's the use of having this thing to save the child's life if you can't educate the child, can't apply it? You've got to reach the mother. So that UNICEF really kind of has to ride on this wave of goodwill. I can remember, for me, one of the most historic periods of my tenureship as the executive director of UNICEF came in spring of 1980. In one 10-day period, I had coming into my office to protest UNICEF action, the U.S. ambassador, the Russian ambassador, the Thai ambassador, the Vietnamese ambassador. And in all 4 cases, I said that I was prepared to take this controversy to public opinion. In all 4 cases, they did not. And you know, it's for this I'm very grateful. It's the public opinion support that we've had through the years. It's the work of my predecessors, thousands of dedicated people. I've created something that, you know, you don't lightly take on the Red Cross. You don't lightly take on UNICEF. It's in these sorts of things. And it's not always easy to deal with these problems, but I hope that we could continue. There was one case not long ago where we were taking a convoy of goods into a city that was blockaded and by a military force. It was fascinating. Our people in the field were very shrewd. It was the French television team that they put on the front truck when this convoy was stopped by the military forces. The French television crew jumped into it and started grinding away on their television. The soldiers weren't going to be caught stopping a UNICEF convoy before the television seized the world, so on they went. It became a very useful technique. Yes.
Policy like the Department of Agriculture is that painting of time influences world food prices and distribution of food by organizations. have any of
Its policy of payment in,
that? In other words, instead of either giving the surplus to foreign country in order to keep to third world countries, giving the accumulated surplus of food back to the farmers to keep the food prices in line.
well, we would obviously prefer to see the food given to those in need. At the moment, the surpluses are so large that, and since the mechanisms have not been found, unfortunately, at the time when there are millions hungry, the mechanisms have not been found to give it away. And I regret this very much that we see this kind of a major cutback. On the other hand, it's a problem we face around the world. There's idle factory capacity all over the United States to make things that people desperately need, from oral rehydration salts to clothing that isn't being used. And this is one of the great problems that the world faces right now. Let me add one thing that I should have in my presentation, which is that I have taught 2 points I should have. One, in describing these 4 programs, one of the respected members of our group that met in September said, well, to remember it easy, why don't we call it GOBI? Not because we are talking about making deserts bloom, although this is really what you are doing, but the G stood for growth charts, and the O for oral rehydration, the B for breastfeeding, and the I for immunization. Always remember GOBI. But they all work had the common of low cost, financially low political cost. And reform may be low financial cost to enforce it, but it may have very high political cost. They identified 2 other programs that really ought to be promoted at the same time. That they added the initials FF. So if you want to do the more luxurious version, it would be FF. Now, one F was family spacing. That we have found that where low-income mothers have a child every year, year and a half, the death rates run about double that of the low-income mothers which have children every 3 to 4 years. And if you think about it, it's rather simple. After the low-income mothers had her first child, she's drawn down. If she immediately has another child, that pulls her down. The baby is underweight. The underweight baby is much more prone to getting ill than a healthy, full-weight baby is. The vicious cycle goes on. And therefore, clearly one of the things that ought to be pushed is family spacing. The second one was food supplements. That very clearly, as part of the nutritional surveillance program, if you identify the problems that a mother can't solve, just changing. If you really need the kind of help that comes to the United States food stamps, serves a great purpose in this country, there ought to be some way of responding to food stamps, food supplements to mothers during their pregnancy and during their lactation periods. This is more expensive, so that's why we said there's a more luxurious version, but there is a more complex set of measures. The second point that I really should emphasize is that these are not programs that really can be taken in isolation. We're really talking about doing this in conjunction with an expansion of what we call the primary health care system. That it's imperative that when it goes on training, health auxiliaries, building the institutional base so that at the end of a big push on this, it doesn't all collapse. One needs to make these programs part of a permanent structure so that they can be sustained over a long time. And there's quite a bit of debate within the health community as to what we call the difference between vertical programs, horizontal programs, diagonal programs, but that really the answer is they do need to be moved together. You can't just push immunization alone without trying to build up at the same time the primary health components in this country. Yes?
As you've noted, a number of us have gone from
didn't say that there's a role per se for large numbers in UNICEF, but you are the professionals in this field. And what you say and do over the next several years can make a great difference. And particularly, I break it down into two categories. One is what do you do individually. There will be many, as you head off, whether you end up in a UNICEF, you end up working for the U.S. Public Health Service, or for the Disease Control Center down in Atlanta, or with the World Bank. In all of these, there is a major opportunity to emphasize this question of what we call cost-effective priorities. We're in great trouble. And if we will selectively identify those areas where one can really push forward with relatively small amounts of money, and particularly to capitalize on existing investment. If every home in Northeast Brazil, in fact, has a transistor radio, we health professionals ought to capture that as an important way of reaching these illiterate families so desperately need help. So there's one of doing it through you individually. But equally important is the fact that I think you collectively as a group can really speak out to the world community and to your senior people that they must get aboard with moving forward on these ideas. The resistance in the health community to move into new practices is mammoth. I was informed the other day, I may be wrong, but I was informed the other day by a person in the field that the first pediatrics textbook that support the concept of oral rehydration and intravenous came out this year. It's a long timeline to get true. We are currently in the middle of a battle with FDA, which is currently in a draft regulation insisting this be issued if used for children under 5 only under medical supervision. Well, the whole theory here is you're trying to get something that the mother can use at home. And these are standards within the health community that we must somehow not let some of these concepts slow us down from moving forward. Yes?
Did you promote the idea of the barefoot doctor?
Absolutely. I think. Well, it's the barefoot doctor is basically a health auxiliary drawn from the village, the local environment, given training, and then able to work in his or her own environment at a low cost and with an understanding of the mindset of the local community. And it's just absolutely imperative that if a health system is going to work, in my judgment, it needs to have a significant proportion of health workers that work at low cost who come out of that community and are able to connect up at the bottom with knowledge that comes down from above and who can participate in changing the attitudes and looking at that. Oh, let me say finally also that we do need in all programs that we do to governmental channels, we do need to examine what are the alternative ways of achieving the same thing. I mentioned this note that I was down at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, which I should say is one of the American institutions that I myself am extremely proud of. I think it's done remarkable things in the world scene in the 35, 40 years of existence in America. It deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. It's out of it that a remarkable series of people have come who've been able to work with the smallpox eradication program. Who run today the WHO immunization program, their oral rehydration, all came out of the Senate. But Bill Foulke, the head of the Senate, was making the comment that for a man age 50, that he has 5 years additional life expectancy over his predecessor of the year 1900 by virtue of the improved medical practices, improvements in technology, medical care that had occurred. He said that same person at age 50 could have an expectation of an additional 11 years if he would, to his own self-reliant efforts, control his drinking, do away with smoking, watch his weight, exercise, etc. And that if one were to spend to increase life expectancy by another year medically, probably even an additional 100 billion would help. Whereas if you do these self-reliant methods yourself, one can increase it by several years and save money at the same time. And I really do think, as we look ahead to the 80s and 90s, more and more of our problems, we need to look for solutions in these ways. And it's in this context that the programs that I've articulated to you tonight, I think, hold out to great potential. And I do hope you will all find your individual ways to beat your tom-toms of support. Thank you.
Indicates the great appreciation that we all have to Jim Grant for being with us and giving us such a lucid, detailed, inspiring talk. You will be interested to know, as an illustration of how dedicated he is, you did notice, of course, how patient and painstaking and deliberate he was in answering all our questions. Well, tonight he is flying to New York and then will fly to Rome, where he has an audience with the Pope tomorrow. So that shows you the absence of pressure that he manifests. We do thank you very, very much, and we're delighted to have you with you. One very brief announcement. The young lady from the Johns Hopkins School of Health prompts it. With respect to participating in specific things, on May the 8th, the Maryland region of UNICEF will hold an affair in Baltimore on that Sunday afternoon that involves a dance recital and then an art auction. There is incidentally, of course, fundraising for UNICEF's good purposes. The chair lady of that fine committee is Karen Little, the young lady in the white suit here in the front row, and I would ask any of you who is interested to please come up and chat with her afterward to get more details. But we earnestly invite you to be with us that day. Please stand up so they all. Thank you, Susan.